It's the shortest verse in the Bible. 2 words, 5 syllables. Jesus wept. But in those tears lies a world of meaning, a moment that reveals the depth of divine love in a way no miracle, no parable, no sermon ever could. To understand why Jesus wept, we must go to Bethany, a small village nestled just 2 miles from Jerusalem. It was the home of 3 siblings, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, friends of Jesus, beloved companions, people who had welcomed him into their home, listened to his teaching, served him meals, and shared moments of quiet friendship beyond the demands of his ministry. So when Lazarus became ill, Mary and Martha did what any of us would do. They sent word to the one they trusted most. "Lord, the one you love is sick." They didn't even need to name him. That's how close they were. And Jesus received the message. But he didn't come. Not immediately. Not even soon. Instead, he said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Then he stayed 2 more days where he was. 2 days of silence. 2 days of waiting. 2 days in which Lazarus declined and died. By the time Jesus finally arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Martha was the first to meet him. Her words were raw, unfiltered. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of grief, of pain, of trust pierced by delay. Jesus answered with one of his most profound declarations, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." But even as he spoke of life, death was still fresh in the air. Mary came next, falling at his feet, weeping, and the others who had gathered wept too. And then, it happened. Jesus looked at the scene before him. Grief in every face. Sorrow in every voice. The finality of a sealed tomb. And the Gospel says, Jesus wept. Why? Why would the Son of God, the one who knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, cry? Why weep when resurrection was minutes away? Because Jesus wasn't weeping for Lazarus alone. He was weeping with us all. He was weeping for every ache, every funeral, every tear that's ever been shed beside a hospital bed or at a graveside or in the silence of a dark room. He was weeping because he saw death for what it truly is, an intruder. A thief. A shadow never meant to exist in the world his Father had declared good. He was weeping not out of despair, but out of compassion. His tears were a protest, a declaration, an echo of Eden's brokenness, and a promise of its redemption. Jesus entered into our grief not as a distant deity, but as a friend who feels deeply, a God who mourns with those who mourn. And that changes everything. It means your tears are not wasted. It means your pain is not ignored. It means the Savior doesn't stand far off from your suffering, he steps into it. With eyes full of tears and a heart full of mercy. Jesus wept because love does that. It enters, it joins, it feels, and then, it acts. Insert midpoint call to action. If this story has moved something in you, if you've ever stood in Mary's place, aching with loss and longing for a sign of hope, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. These stories exist to remind us that faith isn't about avoiding sorrow, but finding God in the midst of it. Your support helps others find this message too. Now, let's return to the moment at the tomb. Jesus, still weeping, asked where Lazarus had been laid. They took him to the tomb. A stone sealed the entrance. And Jesus, with a trembling voice full of both divine authority and human ache, said, "Take away the stone." Martha, practical as always, objected. "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor. He has been there 4 days." Jesus replied, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They rolled the stone aside. Jesus looked up and prayed, not because he needed to, but so the crowd might know who had sent him. Then he shouted with a voice that pierced both time and eternity, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had been dead, wrapped in grave clothes, sealed in silence, walked out of the tomb, alive, breathing, restored. But before the miracle came the mourning. Before the resurrection came the weeping. And that order matters, because Jesus didn't come to bypass our pain. He came to transform it, to walk into the valley of the shadow with us, to feel every sting, every ache, every tear, and redeem it from the inside out. He wept not just for Lazarus, but for every Lazarus, every loved one lost, every prayer unanswered in the way we hoped, every soul that has ever cried, "Lord, if you had been here." Because he was, and he is, and he will be. That's what sets Jesus apart from every other figure in history. Not just that he did miracles, not just that he taught with authority, but that he felt, he cared, he cried. He showed us that to be divine is not to be detached. It is to be fully present, fully involved, willing to enter the tomb before calling someone out of it. And this moment in Bethany, this simple verse, "Jesus wept," shows us that God's glory is not at odds with human grief. In fact, they often walk side by side. Jesus wept, and then he raised. He felt, and then he healed. He mourned, and then he moved. This is the rhythm of divine love. But don't miss this. Even after Lazarus came out, he was still bound. The grave clothes still clung to his hands, his feet, his face. And Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." Because resurrection isn't just about breath, it's about freedom. It's not enough to come back to life. You must be loosed to live. That's the part we often forget. We celebrate the comeback. But God also cares about the cords, the lingering wrappings of pain, trauma, shame. Jesus doesn't just want to revive you. He wants to release you. That's why he weeps. Because he sees not just the tomb, but the ties, not just the loss, but the long road ahead. And still, he calls. He weeps, and he calls. He weeps, and he heals. He weeps, and he frees. That's the kind of God who invites you close. Not one who watches from a distance, but one who steps into the very center of sorrow and says, "Let me carry that with you." So what does this mean for us? It means your story isn't over. It means if you're standing beside a tomb today, a tomb of grief, of disappointment, of silence, you are not alone. Jesus is near, and he's not rushing you past the pain. He's sitting in it with you, weeping, listening, loving, and at the right moment, speaking. Come out. That's not a command of condemnation. It's an invitation to life. To breathe again. To hope again. To trust again. Not because the pain didn't happen, but because Jesus entered it. That's what transforms everything. Not that we escape grief, but that God stepped into it. And when he did, he left behind a trail of tears that lead us home. Tears that say, "I see you." Tears that say, "I'm with you." Tears that say, "This is not the end." We need that reminder. Because life is full of losses we don't understand. Prayers we whisper in the dark, wondering if they ever reach heaven. But the story of Bethany tells us, they do. They reach a Savior who doesn't just reign from a throne, but kneels beside graves, and weeps. But those tears are not a sign of weakness. They are a sign of love. A love so deep it steps into death's domain just to be near us. A love so fierce it will not let sorrow have the final word. That's why the story of Lazarus isn't just about a man brought back to life. It's about a world being shown what kind of Savior has come. A Savior who weeps before he works, who listens before he lifts, who stands beside the tomb not to scold us for our sadness, but to share it, because in the heart of God, grief is not an interruption to glory. It's part of the pathway. And that's hard for us to accept. We want joy without sorrow, healing without hurting, resurrection without death. But Jesus didn't skip the pain. He embraced it, and in doing so, He gave us permission to feel too. To not rush through our grief. To not minimize our sorrow. To not pretend faith means smiling when our hearts are breaking. Faith doesn't erase tears. It gives them meaning. It anchors them in hope. Because while Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb, he also knew something more, that his own tomb was coming. That he too would die. That he too would be wrapped in linen, laid in darkness, and yet, he still chose to cry. He didn't insulate himself from human pain. He let it touch him. And in doing so, he gave us a glimpse of just how far God was willing to go to redeem us. This moment in Bethany wasn't just a miracle preview. It was a foreshadowing of a greater death, a greater resurrection, a greater grief, a greater glory. Because when Jesus stood before Lazarus' tomb, he was already walking toward his own. And he knew the price he would pay to undo the power of death forever. He knew what it would take to unbind not just Lazarus, but all of us. It would cost him everything. But he went anyway. That's the weight behind his tears. They weren't just for that day. They were for all of us. For the generations yet to come. For the aching souls who would read those words, Jesus wept, and realize, I am seen. I am loved. I am not alone. Even here, even now, even in the shadow of death. This is why Jesus wept. Not out of fear, not out of powerlessness, but out of love so fierce it refused to look away. And that love still weeps with you, still walks with you, still whispers, roll away the stone, still calls, come forth, still says, unbind him and let him go, and still promises, one day, death will die, and every tear will be wiped away. Because the same voice that cried outside Lazarus' tomb will one day speak over all creation. Behold, I make all things new. That is our hope. That is our anchor. That is our God. And his tears were never wasted. They were the beginning of the end of grief. They were the doorway through which resurrection stepped into the world. They were the proof that heaven sees, feels, and enters what we carry. So if today your heart is heavy, know this: Jesus understands. And more than that, Jesus is near. He is not far off in the sky, looking down. He is beside you, kneeling in the dirt of Bethany, in the ashes of your own sorrow. He knows what it's like to lose, to ache, to carry questions in the silence. And that knowing makes all the difference. Because Jesus doesn't simply offer explanations. He offers himself, his presence, his tears, his comfort. That's what Mary and Martha needed most, not a theological answer, but a present Savior. And that's what we need too. Not just words, but a witness. Not just doctrine, but divine empathy. The kind that says, I'm here, even when it hurts. That's the God who weeps. And what's more, the God who acts. Because love doesn't just feel, it moves. Jesus didn't stop at sorrow. He stepped forward in power. He called Lazarus out because he knew death didn't have the final say. He called him out because the story wasn't over. And he's still doing that today. Still speaking to places we thought were sealed forever. Still calling light into darkness. Still commanding life to return where only silence remains. So whatever tomb you've accepted, whether it's the death of a dream, the loss of a relationship, the fading of hope, hear him now. Come out. He's not afraid of the smell. He's not shocked by the delay. He doesn't hesitate because it's been 4 days, or 4 years, or 4 decades. He still speaks. And when he does, even death obeys. Even silence breaks. Even hearts begin to beat again. This is the gospel in its most human form. Not just that God came to save, but that he came to feel. To step into the middle of our mourning and transform it from the inside out. That's why Jesus wept. To remind us that even God does not rush grief. That he honors it, sits with it, and gently, when we're ready, speaks life again. That is the kind of Savior we have. Not one who scolds us for crying, but one who cries with us. Not one who waits on the other side of resurrection, but one who meets us in the tomb. Because he's been there too. And he walked out, not just for himself, but for us, so we would know that no grave is final. No death is forever. No heartbreak is beyond his reach. This is the story behind his tears. A story of love that lingers. A story of comfort that comes close. A story of a God who doesn't just fix, he feels. And because of that, we are never alone. Not in the darkest valley. Not at the coldest grave. Not in the most silent pain. He is there, still weeping, still waiting, still whispering our name, ready to call us out, ready to loosen our bindings, ready to walk with us into life again. So take heart. The tears of Jesus are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of a new one. A story where pain is not denied, but redeemed. Where loss is not erased, but transformed. Where grief becomes the place God meets us most tenderly. This is what Jesus showed us when he wept. That to be human is to feel. And to be divine is not to escape those feelings, but to embrace them with holy purpose. He didn't need to cry, but he chose to, because your pain matters to him. Your questions matter. Your aching, wordless prayers, they matter. And when you cannot lift your eyes, he kneels beside you. When you cannot speak, he hears your silence. When you cannot move, he sits in stillness with you. Until the time comes, and he says, "Let's rise." That's the beauty of his tears. They don't leave us in sorrow, they walk us through it. Like a hand on your shoulder in a crowded funeral. Like the stillness of a friend who doesn't try to fix, just stays. Like the warmth of sunlight after a long night of storm. He doesn't rush the process. He honors the ache. And then, he speaks resurrection. Sometimes in thunder. Sometimes in a whisper. Sometimes through a verse, a song, a stranger's kindness, a breath of peace you didn't expect. But always, it carries that same echo from Bethany. This is not the end. So let that truth settle deep in your soul today. You may be wrapped in grief, bound by sorrow, standing at a sealed place you never thought you'd revisit. But Jesus is near, not just to raise you, but to weep with you first. Because that's who he is. The God who cries. The God who calls. The God who carries. The one who never leaves. So yes, Jesus wept, and in doing so, he gave us permission to do the same. But he also gave us hope. That tears are not the final word. Life is. Love is. He is. And that changes everything. Let this be your comfort. If Jesus wept, then surely he understands your tears. If he wept, then surely he walks with you now. And if he called Lazarus out, he will call you too. Not just once, but again and again. From fear, from shame, from doubt, from despair, until the grave clothes fall, and you walk in the light of a love that never stopped coming for you. This is the story behind his tears. Not weakness, not delay, but divine compassion. A God who cries, so we can rise. A Savior who mourns, so we can move. A Redeemer who stands at every tomb, and calls us home. Let the stone roll away. Let the voice call your name. Let the tears wash what words cannot. Because he weeps with you. And then, he leads you into life. And when the day comes, and it will, when every tear is wiped away, when every grave is emptied, when every sorrow is silenced by the voice of the Lamb, we will remember that he cried first, that our tears were never lonely, that the God who holds the universe once knelt in the dust of Bethany and let his heart break, so ours could heal, so we could know we're not forgotten, so we could find in his tears a love stronger than death. That's what makes this story holy. Not just that Lazarus came back, but that Jesus came close. Close enough to feel it all. Close enough to cry. Close enough to carry you. So don't hide your tears. Offer them. Don't rush your sorrow. Invite him into it. Don't measure your faith by how loud you sing, but by how honestly you grieve. Because faith isn't found in avoiding pain. It's found in facing it, with the one who's already overcome it. And his name is Jesus. The resurrection, the life, the one who wept, and still does, for you. With you. Until all things are made new. Until sorrow is swallowed in joy. Until graves give way to gardens. And the sound of his voice makes every broken thing whole. So let your soul rest tonight. He sees, he knows, he weeps, and he will raise. This is not the end. This is where life begins again. Because he wept, and he rose, and so will you. That is the story behind his tears. And when you tell your story, and you will, you won't just speak of the miracle. You'll speak of the moment before it. The stillness, the ache, the tomb, and the tears that met you there. Because that's where faith was forged. Not in the shout of, "Come forth," but in the silence before it. In the waiting, in the weeping. That's where you met him. That's where he met you. And that is what you will never forget. Not just that he raised you, but that he stayed with you. Until the stone was ready to roll. Until the grave was ready to open. Until your heart was ready to hope again. This is why Jesus wept. Not just to feel your pain, but to walk you through it. Step by step, tear by tear, until joy returns. Until life breathes again. Until your voice joins his, and you call others out of their tombs too. Because that's what love does. It weeps, it waits, it walks, and then, it resurrects. That is the way of the cross. That is the power of compassion. That is the story behind his tears. So if today finds you broken, uncertain, standing at the edge of your own Bethany, remember this: your tears are seen, your waiting is not wasted, and your Savior is near. He has not forgotten you. He is not late. He is love, wrapped in flesh, moving toward you even now. And one day soon, whether here or in eternity, he will speak, he will call your name, and you will rise, not just from grief, but into glory, into joy that cannot be shaken, into life that cannot be taken. Because Jesus wept, and then he conquered, and in him, so will you. This is the truth you carry. This is the hope you hold. This is the God who weeps, and waits, and wins. So walk forward gently now. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not without hope. The tears of God have touched your sorrow, and his voice is calling you forward, upward, homeward, into life, into love, into the fullness of what only he can restore. Because Jesus wept, and because of that, you can live. And if you ever forget, if the weight returns, if the silence stretches too long, if you find yourself staring once again at a sealed tomb, remember Bethany. Remember the tears. Remember the voice that broke through grief. And know, he's still speaking. He's still near. He's still the God who weeps, and the God who raises. This is the story behind his tears. And now, it's part of yours too.